How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which is one of my favorite books. A great story that he tells in that book of Dale goes to a dinner, and it's one of those dinners that's been arranged by the host where like a lot of people don't know each other. And he gets seated by this random person who is a botanist. So he's in plant biology, and Dale knows nothing about plant biology, right? So, but of course, being the fact that he's Dale Carnegie, he's a good conversationalist. So he starts asking the botanist about botany and his job and stuff. And the botanist is really excited to talk about this. So he lights up, he's talking about it. And at the end of the night, the botanist tells the host, wow, Dale is such an interesting person and he is such a good conversationalist. And it's just hilarious because Dale really didn't say a word all night in terms of about himself. He just sort of allowed that other person to talk about themselves. And that's something that most of us just treasure more than anything.
What's up, party people? Jeff Callahan, founder of Become More Compelling here, and you're listening to another episode of Become More Compelling Radio, the podcast where I have on charisma and people skills experts. I glean all the glorious information I can from the brains, and I serve that to you on a silver platter so that you can have more compelling career, business, and social life when it comes to interacting with your fellow humans. My guest on the show today is Kyle Ingham. He's the founder and editor of The Distilled Man, a channel that provides actionable advice for the everyday gentleman. The Distilled Man offers practical tips on social mastery, self-development, and how to be better at life. And Kyle has a lot of educational videos and articles and podcasts. He has an amazing podcast that you should listen to, by the way, where he just gives men the knowledge and the tools to become the best versions of themselves. And that's an awesome mission, and I love it. And I love this conversation. Kyle and I talk about how to make amazing first impressions. We talk about how to hit cancel on limiting internal self-talk that's negative. We talk about how to be interested in other people, and kind of build that rapport so that you can make them feel like the only people in the room. We also talk about how to just deliver with the same language that you're using currently, how to deliver that in a package that has a lot of energy and changes that conversation completely. So you can use the same words but have a completely different result. I love it. Kyle has been featured in the San Francisco Examiner, Forbes, The Goodman Project, and many more. Kyle actually has an awesome free download that I definitely want you to check out. It's called the 48-Hour Gentleman, your one-weekend plan for more confidence, poise, and manly know-how. And of course, that link will be in the podcast description and the show notes, but it's thedistilledman.com/48-Hour Gentleman ebook, and with dashes where there should be spaces. I think you're smart. I think you can figure that out. Also, before we hop into the conversation, I wanted to say, if you like this podcast, do me a favor, leave me a review on iTunes. I love getting those reviews. I want more people to be able to find this podcast and listen to it. And a good way for that to happen is for you, the person who's listening to this right now, to just hop on iTunes, leave me a quick review of something that you like about the show so that I know what to keep doing. Also, if you don't receive email from me, I want you to go to becomemorecompelling.com/go, and sign up to receive email. There's some awesome stuff that I don't share publicly. I do Q&A videos, podcasts like you're listening to right now, articles, and then just a bunch of cool stuff. So I'm really excited to share that with you. All right, without further ado, let's hop in and meet Kyle. Hey, Kyle, how's it going?
Good. I'm glad to be here, Jeff.
I'm so excited to have you on Become More Compelling Radio. Something that I love about your advice, your podcast, which is amazing, by the way, is like
Thank you.
Your advice is just really, really down to earth, really actionable, and really well thought out too. Like, that's something that I really appreciate about you. So I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, yeah, that's always been a big thing for me is, even though we do cover topics that are a little more cerebral, at the end of the day, I always want to provide, advice that's actionable so guys can get out there and improve their lives right then and there.
Yeah. And so for my listeners that may not know much about you, like what's your superhero origin story? What's your backstory?
My backstory. Well, so this has actually been a long time in the making. I originally started the Distilled Man about 7 years ago. And I was in my early 30s at the time, so I'm actually older than most people think. I'm 41. And I was working in an ad agency, so I'd had a pretty good career at that point. And just one day I was at the ad agency, and all of a sudden, I guess the best way to describe it is that my biological grilling clock went off. It was this weird thing where, I'd grilled before, like every man grills. I mean, you can't really avoid it. But I sort of had this realization all of a sudden that I wasn't good at it. And it suddenly bothered me because I was starting to develop mastery in other areas of my life and certainly my career. And I just had this moment where I realized, you know what? I really just want to grill. I want to cook animal flesh over fire. So it really was this kind of like primal awakening. And so I spent like a whole week being totally distracted at work. Like I didn't get anything done. And, went out and bought a barbecue because I didn't have one at the time. Went out and bought books so I could actually learn. Because again, I think a lot of guys, they fake that they can barbecue just because they think it's something every guy should know, right? But the truth is, guys actually aren't born and knowing how to do stuff like this. And that was my realization as I was getting into that journey, is that, why shouldn't I know this? I mean, this is something I should know because I'm a man, right? Knowing how to grill. And as I was going through that journey, I realized there's all these other skills that men are supposed to know just by virtue of being men. But the truth is that if you don't learn this stuff from your dad or your big brother growing up, I mean, you're kind of SOL. And, I think a lot of guys feel like there's almost like an expiration on when you should learn this stuff by. But here I was, in my early 30s, kind of having this awakening and realizing, you know what, it's not too late. I want to learn these things. I want to learn how to be a better man. And that's kind of when the light bulb went off for me that, you know what, if other guys want to learn this stuff, or if I want to learn, if I want to learn this stuff, I think probably other guys are out there who would want to learn this stuff as well. And so it was at that point that I sort of had this idea for a company. And at that time, it was not an internet-based company at all. And I had a really crappy website, but it was all based on sort of the model of like a cooking class initially. So where you get, 8 guys together with a live instructor, you rent a space, you're actually physically there together, and you're doing hands-on learning. And so I actually quit my day job in 2011 and launched this in San Francisco. And I was doing in-person classes, and it was a lot of fun. And I got some initial successes, got some press very quickly. I launched with, I think, 4 classes. One, of course, was the grilling class. Another one was a gentleman's introduction to wine, taught by a sommelier. The other one was the art and science of poker, and that was taught by a poker expert. And then the final one was actually a guitar class that I taught because I thought that was a skill that is really helpful for men. Maybe you don't need to know it, but it's awfully helpful. So I was doing that for a while and again, had some good momentum, had a lot of excitement. But what I found very quickly is obviously I had no experience in this arena. Event marketing is really, really hard, especially if you don't know what you're doing. And especially if you don't have an audience, which I didn't at the time. And so I was kind of grinding it out for like a year and a half or so. And finally, after many people telling me, oh gosh, you should really do something more scalable so you can reach more people, I finally sort of pivoted more to doing what I'm doing now, which is really, trying to share content with people. And obviously it's been much more successful because I can reach, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And I'm able to create things that, content that continues to be consumed. So unlike an event where you're sort of creating it once and trying to recreate it each time, you're able to sort of create this content once that people can use over and over again. So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I've listened to a few podcasts that you've been on and your podcasts, and I always wondered what was the story, like how did you segue from, because I know that you have an advertising background.
Yeah.
I have a marketing and sales background. How did you segue from that to what you do currently? And that's awesome. So you just gave me like the Paul Harvey, like the rest of the story, which is really fascinating.
Yes.
Speaking of a really good voices, Paul Harvey, amazing.
Oh yes. Rest in peace.
Yeah, exactly. I really like that because you were in this job. You realized that it wasn't something. Well, you were successful, but you kind of had this itch that you wanted to get out and experience some different things. And so you kind of founded a company where you were teaching skills to people. And as a side note, I actually I know a little guitar, just a little bit. A, C, nice. G, A minor. Enough to play a Coldplay song that got my wife to go out with me and later got married. So minimum effective dose, and it worked.
The effective dose. Yeah, that is awesome. And, honestly, that's all you need. I remember in our guitar class, we only taught like 4 chords because that's the key. It's like you don't need to know everything. You just need to know a few.
Yeah. Oh, man. Okay. So let's rabbit trail down this hole. So this is something that I've been thinking about a lot recently because The way you could describe a lot of my audience is, and maybe a lot of people out there in general, is the ambitious overthinker. So we're all, and I think now more than ever in human history, we're bombarded by so much information, so much kind of pieces of like, you can learn this, you can learn this, you can learn this. It's really difficult to look at the skill I want to learn. Say you want to learn how to be really good at making first impressions, for example.
Right.
You could read millions of articles on how to make a good first impression, but when it comes time for the moment, you might forget everything. And I think a lot of the cause of that is we're just reading too much and we're not taking action enough. So I'm a big believer in, instead of just in case information where you're like, okay, I need to know every little detail, every sort of branching conversational tree, versus, hey, I just want to know how to have good body language when I approach someone, because I know that a lot of our first impressions are actually before we open our mouths, and then rapidly put it into practice. So something I teach, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, is just in time information is like the information I'm consuming. How can I put it into practice in the next 24 to 48 hours? Because I don't want to hoard information. I want to actually practice information. So you got any thoughts on how to balance information versus action?
Well, it's so funny that you mentioned this sort of just in time versus just in case, because I was going to bring that up if you didn't, because that's something that a mantra that I've heard in the last year or so that has been really helpful for me. Because, I mean, as you know, for someone who has an online channel, like you said, there's all this information all the time about things that you could be doing, ways that you could be growing your channel, your business, but also, like you said, growing your personal skills. And it's easy to get stuck in this, I call it a rut almost, of over consuming sort of like self-development information and entrepreneurial information for me, in my case. And so I've really taken it to heart in the last year or so that, no, you're absolutely right. You need to focus on the things that you're going to actually take action on. And I think the first person who said it, where I really took it to heart, was actually Pat Flynn from Smart Passive Income. He's obviously got a great channel. I'm sure you're aware of him. But he said, essentially, he was even more specific. He said, listen, instead of, buying all these books about things that you may be working on in your life, focus on one, and then focus on what you're doing currently in your life and what you're going to take action on, and buy a book on that. And obviously, it's not just about books. It's about online courses. It's about maybe the blogs that you read. Maybe it's even some of the events that you attend, because that's obviously, for guys who are looking to improve themselves, like one of the huge things that I like to say is get out there, get out from behind the computer, get out from behind the book, meet people in person, because that's where real big growth in terms of your network, your career, even your social skills really happens. So again, I think it's just having that discipline to recognize, hey, I'm about to go for that shiny object. I want to read about this for that just in case information. I'm going to stop myself and realize, no, I'm not actually going to make any real progress on igloo building in Alaska this year. Maybe I should wait until I'm actually ready to take action on that and focus on what I'm really going to work on.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Side note, I was actually married in Fairbanks, Alaska, of all places.
Oh my goodness.
I'm convinced we're the same person. So it's really powerful because I know you've had Greg McCown on your podcast, the author of Essentialism. Amazing book, incredible book.
Right, yeah, great.
And one thing that I've really taken to heart from his work is the concept of trade-offs. So when you go after one thing, I think we as humans, we love those shiny objects. We want to improve. Well, speaking from the self-development space where, you guys are weirdos like me, we want to improve so much in so many different areas. But the reality is we cannot focus, 1% of our attention in 360 degrees.
Right.
Even though a lot of people try that, they obviously just go 1% of the journey. It's better to focus like 99% of your energy in one direction, at least one direction at a time. So when I coach people, like it's coaching for 3 months. So we want to have continued progress in a specific direction. I think people are scared of closing doors. So they think like, oh man, if I start learning guitar, like that means I can't learn grilling. Well, it's like, it's not a question.
It's absolutely true. You have to pick one. I'm sorry, guys.
No. You can just put your guitar on top of the grill. When you break it down into time frames, like it becomes pretty easy. It's like, yes, you can do both. You just can't do both at the same time. So you have to pick and choose. You can do, which one do you want to do first? And like in business, a really good example is like, there's literally, this is something that I find extremely fascinating. Like there's so many things that you can learn. Like an email in my inbox just yesterday was like this thing about Pinterest. And it's like, look, I haven't focused on Pinterest. I probably won't focus on Pinterest. So I can safely delete that email because it's not part of what I want to do or the platform that I want to build in the specific area. But it's easy to get sidelined and sidetracked by those shiny objects. So really good call out. I love that. So when it comes to first impressions, because you have a really good video on first impressions, and we'll link to that in the show notes. What would you say are kind of the minimum effective building blocks of presenting yourself in a way that, I think a really, really good example is like we've got a guy, he's going to a conference. You're going to be meeting people. Maybe you've met them online, you've exchanged emails back and forth, but you're meeting them in person for the first time. What are some things that you would tell someone to keep in mind when they're walking into the room, even like, not just like the conference ballroom, but like even like the elevator ride down? Like, what do you think that journey should look like for those people?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First impressions are so important. There's been a lot of research done about this. I think it was the reference I mentioned in the video is Olivia Fox-Cabane's book, The Charisma Myth. There's some research that she cites there. Essentially says that people are kind of hardwired to remember first impressions. So it's kind of, it's a good thing if you know to take advantage of it, but it's also a bad thing if you're not paying attention to that first impression. So essentially the research showed that if people have a choice to be challenged on information that they already know or just confirm something they already know, they're going to kind of take the lazy route. Mm-hmm. So if you've already introduced them to a part of yourselves and they've made that sort of initial decision about who and what you are, and again, this is all subconscious. It's not like they're saying, oh yeah, that guy Jeff, jackass. It's not that they're thinking that. It's just that there's these subtle decisions that are made. They're sort of doing the mental sorting. Okay, this is where this guy fits. This is what I've learned about him in the first 10 to 15 seconds. So once they learn that, you essentially have to kind of get over that initial decision that they've made. And so the key is if you recognize that, to know that you really do you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. And so I think the biggest thing is it breaks down to like two major buckets, and it's really basic. Of course, one is the nonverbal communication. So how you're coming across in terms of like how you're presenting yourself. Obviously, if you come to a networking event and you're wearing footy pajamas as opposed to wearing, like a nice suit or a nice business casual outfit, people are going to make some decisions about you, right? And then obviously your posture. And I know people hear this all the time, but it's so important. If you are slumped, if you're not, if you look like you're not having a good time, if you look like you're tired or disinterested, that's going to come across to people, right? So it's just basic stuff like that. Just remembering that, I hate to say it, but you're on stage a little bit, right? Just remembering that you have to kind of like pick it up a little bit. And then the other part, of course, is the verbal communication, is actually what you say. And I think I talk about this in the video, but Patrick King, who has a ton of great books, I think he actually knows our mutual friend Mike. He's got a lot of great books on this, social skills. If you check out Amazon, he's written like 50 books or something. But he writes a lot about first impressions, and one of the things that he says is that your verbal first impression consists of about the first 10 to 20 words that come out of your mouth. And of course, that statistic is impossible to validate. So, you can't really say whether that's right or not, but the spirit of what he's saying is true. It's like if you run into a room and you say something totally off the wall, you can't take those first 10 to 20 words back. That's going to make an impression on people. And so, he really advocates for trying to be conscious of the way that you approach people at first. The other part is your warmth. So I think one of the things that people forget, especially if they're nervous and they come to like an event or they're meeting people for the first time, is a lot of us are stuck in our own heads, right? We're thinking about ourselves and thinking about how we're going to be received, just because those inner voices come out, we're being self-critical in our heads and we're like, will I be accepted? Blah, blah, blah. And we forget that everyone else is feeling the same way, right? Nobody wants to be rejected. People want to be accepted when you meet them for the first time. So if you're so much in your head that you're not projecting warmth to the other person, warmth and interest, then that can actually be really, really alienating to people as I'm Yeah, again, I think it falls into those major buckets of the verbal and the nonverbal communication.
Yeah, I'm very interested in when it comes to people skills. There's sort of the people skills that we project out to the world, and there's also the people skills that we're like inwardly projecting to ourselves. So if we're in our head and we're thinking about like, oh man, the shirt is uncomfortable. Why did I wear this shirt? It's got a floral pattern. I never wear floral patterns. We just got I actually have a shirt in my closet that is floral pattern. I always get compliments on it, and I do wear it, but it took me like a year to wear it. Not for any particular reason, but it's just funny how sometimes things can throw us off. It's almost like a pendulum swinging internal when it should be more external. Do you have any thoughts or any strategies? What are some good ways to maybe rev up our social momentum or our, get kind of a good vibe going where we're more externally focused than internally focused?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to some of the basics in, something like a classic like How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, which is one of my favorite books. It's really trying to step outside your head and try to just be interested in someone else for a second. You'll be surprised at what magic happens when you do that. There's a great story that he tells in that book of Dale goes to a dinner, and it's one of those dinners that's been arranged by the host where a lot of people don't know each other. He gets seated by this random person who is a botanist. So he's in plant biology, and Dale knows nothing about plant biology, right? So, but of course, being the fact that he's Dale Carnegie, he's a good conversationalist. So he starts asking the botanist about botany and his job and stuff. And the botanist is really excited to talk about this. So he lights up, he's talking about it, and Dale is excited to see that the guy is excited. So he doesn't change the conversation all night, essentially. So they talk about botany the entire night. And then at the end of the night, the botanist tells the host, wow, Dale is such an interesting person. And he is such a good conversationalist. And it's just hilarious because Dale really didn't say a word all night in terms of about himself. He just sort of allowed that other person to talk about themselves. And that's something that most of us just treasure more than anything, being able to talk about our own interests. That's when we really light up.
Yeah, I was just thinking in John Schaefer's book, The Light Switch, he talks about kind of the golden rule of friendship is when you're having a conversation with someone, make sure that they feel good about themselves. So, might be something like, I know you like mixed drinks, you like to grill. So if we were at a dinner party, I might ask you about hey, you know what? So if I wanted to make like a good steak on the grill, how would I do that? And you get to teach me something. Right. And it just feels good because I'm giving you a platform to talk more about what you like. And then at the end of the night, if we continue that line of conversation, you'll walk up to the host and be like, man, that Jeff guy is really awesome. How do you know him?
Right.
It's funny. Once we get outside of our head and we get into the room, because ultimately that's kind of the struggle, is realizing that everyone there is kind of on equal footing. No one wants to be, perceived as the awkward person. We all want to be accepted. And I think this goes back to our caveman days when we were probably making steaks a lot over the fire. We want to be accepted by the group because that's what will make us feel good. And there's, psychological reasons, there's safety in the group and that kind of stuff. But I think that's a really good call out. And something else that you talk about that I thought was really interesting is on the topic of small talk, when you're kind of having that back and forth with folks, providing rich details to things that they can actually grab onto, where they can actually keep talking about, maybe you ask me a question and I don't just say yeah, we got married in Alaska.
Right.
I say right. It was beautiful. We got married at the Museum of the North in Alaska. And in Fairbanks is actually a desert, but it was snowing that day. And that's really, really rare for March is when we got married. And actually the strangers started clapping because it was a very small ceremony. It was my wife, my best man. And, we actually got married by a dog sled person who actually takes couples out and marries them on dog sleds, but we're too cold natured.
But it's so funny that you bring up that point, because I was actually going to follow with that, because it is so important. I feel like it's this. I'm starting to realize in the last few years that I feel like it's almost like a secret skill in some ways, because in some ways it's counter to what we're taught, and counter to even what I just mentioned with the Dale Carnegie example, because like we just said, you want to get out of your head and sort of get interested in another person. And that's obviously key to, having a warm interaction and making the other person light up. But like you just said, another key and another secret is really giving the other person something to chew on when you make a comment or are asked a question. So like you said, if you're asked, hey, how was your wedding, providing more detail. But I think this happens on such a more regular basis. Like even when you're at the office and people ask you how your weekend was, the default response is, oh yeah, it was fine, and how far does the conversation go when you have a response like that? It's a single syllable response, not very far.
No.
But if you can, like you said, provide some richness in your answer, you're not begging to have a follow-up, but there's going to be a follow-up from the other person. If you say, yeah, my weekend was good, I skydived, I harpooned a whale, some crazy story, and it doesn't have to be actually a crazy story. It's just more that you provide this rich detail so that somewhere in your answer there's going to be something that person can latch onto and provide some interest and ultimately maybe some common ground, because ultimately that's the key to, going from small talk to actually creating rapport, where you forget that you're trying to talk to someone.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation with Kyle momentarily. I just wanted to take a second and say, if you haven't yet signed up to receive email from me, please do. Go to becomemorecompelling.com/go. G-O. Why? Because you'll get awesome podcasts like you're listening to today. You'll get guides on group conversations. You'll get awesome stuff that I never share publicly, Q&A videos, and much, much more. So go to becomemorecompelling.com/go, and I'll send that stuff right over to you after you enter your email. Okay, let's get back to our conversation with Kyle. It's interesting because I feel like a lot of folks default to a place of, say it's like Monday morning, you're around the coffee pot, you guys are about to head into like the Monday morning meeting. It's really tempting to just give kind of a basic answer. And even if we do elaborate, it's kind of tempting to not put a lot of energy into what we're saying. But you can have sort of a mundane, like, yeah, we went to Home Depot and then I got up on the roof and I did this. But if you're saying, if you tell it in just if you literally had the exact same language, but you just pumped up the energy 10%, and then you used more hand gestures, it sounds crazy, but just giving a little bit more enthusiasm in that same conversation, the outcome of that conversation is going to be different, because people are very, very perceptive, and they're going to pick up on the energy that you're putting out. And if you're putting out good energy, this goes for the Monday morning staff meeting, this goes for meeting someone at a conference or a meetup, putting out the right kind of vibe, the right kind of energy, you're going to get a different result because the input in that situation is different.
Totally agree. And specifically with Home Depot, I think that actually that is ripe for exciting conversation, because I could talk about Home Depot for hours.
Man, if they could just I like to go to the lumber section and just smell. So if they had a candle, if they had a Home Depot candle, I'd buy it. And I would just put it in my office, and then I would be like, yeah, I'm just going to light the candle and it smells like lumber. That's what I want.
It smells like sweat and sawdust and like engine grease or something.
It's like mandatory plaid shirt with this candle. Like I can't wear something else. I have to get my one plaid work shirt. I have to get that and wear it while I'm smelling the candle.
Nice.
That's my own kind of weird digression. But yeah, you can make the most mundane things. You can make it exciting by the package that you put it in.
That's a great way to put it, I think.
This is awesome. I'm loving this so far. Talking about kind of those intangibles. So when it comes to conversations, when it comes to meeting people for the first time, so much of it is kind of that unsaid thing. So, do you have any advice when it comes to having a good presence when you walk into the room, projecting confidence? How do you think about, cause I think the more you get into this stuff, maybe when people are first trying to improve their people skills, they're going to look up like tactical things. Like I want to know this script or that script. I want to know how to give a handshake, whatever it is. But then the further along the journey you get, I can, speaking for myself specifically, is I'm really attracted by kind of those intangible things, like listening through the words that people are saying. Like, what are they not saying? What kind of emotions are behind those words? What do people need in the moment to make them feel good about, be it the situation or the process or something like that. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things is something we sort of touched on a moment ago, and when making first impressions is making yourself sort of what I call a warm environment or receptive environment. Because again, I think as nervous as you may feel coming into a social situation, you have to remember that everyone else is nervous too. Like, I mean, I remember one of the phrases quotes I always remember is a story about Johnny Carson, who said that, he did something like 4,000 shows in his life, and he was nervous before every single one. So if, big time stars can be nervous after having 20-year, 30-year careers doing what they're doing, then we have to remember that most other people are nervous too, especially in social situations, because there's always that worry of being judged or being accepted. So I think, again, first being that sort of like receptive, warm person. So I think, and that's easy. And it is tactical. I think just having a smile on your face, being attentive to the other person. So not like averting your eyes and being elsewhere in your mind, but actually being open and receptive to talk to this person. But the other thing too, I think, is a more subtle recommendation. And this is a funny recommendation because I think a lot of people, when they hear this, it sounds artificial, but the reason that you need to talk about it is because the people who are truly great at social skills are doing this naturally. So, and the recommendation is to work on trying to sort of synchronize yourself with the other person. And you probably heard this before, is that, and again, it sounds artificial, but the basic idea is that when you talk to someone, someone is going to be more likely to want to talk to you if you are maintaining the same energy level in your same, volume level of your conversation, if your tone of voice is similar, but also even your body language. And they've done studies, I think, that have shown that as people are talking, they often unconsciously mimic each other. So if you and I were here in person and you crossed your arms, I might cross my arms a moment later. And it works on the positive as well. If you smile, I might smile as well. And it's this subtle thing. I think that's something that guys can work on, but I recognize that it sounds very like calculated when you recommend it. But I think the reason that it's important to actually try to do consciously if you're not doing it is because, like I said earlier, the people who are naturals at dealing with other people and making other people feel comfortable, they do it without thinking. I think the prescription is to like get over the fact that it seems creepy to think about it, try to do it, and then you'll get to the point where you're not being calculated about it and where you do it out of habit, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I love that so much. And you're exactly right. People who are very skilled with people, they're doing this automatically. They're doing this on a subconscious level. And I really love kind of the notion of real versus fake, because to me, that's a complete illusion. You don't act the same way around your grandma that you might around your drinking buddies. Like, we're always adapting constantly. And it's funny.
Speak for yourself.
I mean, maybe you invite Granny to go drinking with you. But what's really fascinating to me is, cause it's something that I do. Like, I consciously, even if it's just like through, it might be meeting someone face to face or even through email, like if they use a certain word to, for example, if they say, I want to have great conversations, I'm going to mirror that language back to them. Like, I'm not going to change up the language that people use, because people like people that are like them. If it means adjusting like the way I say something or the language that I use when I say something, I'm going to go ahead and do that because it's going to put that person at ease and it's going to increase their comfort level. I do that with clients. I do that with pretty much everyone in my life. At this point, it's automatic. And in the persuasion world, that's actually called pacing and leading, where you're pacing the other person. It could be even as simple as breathing in and out at the same time as the other person. You guys are syncing up. And later on in the conversation, you might take a drink of your water, even if it's empty. The other person's going to unconsciously take a drink of their water. And when that happens, when you've achieved synchronicity, yes, I got it. When you achieve that, you're in rapport. Like you are in rapport with another person. And I mean, I spent years, over a decade in sales. And, I mean, that's just something that I think any good salesperson is going to do. But really with sales, it's like, especially the kind of sales that I did, it was never ever high pressure. It was always just like relationship first. So, these were automatically things that I kind of needed to do. And of course it works really well socially because you're going to feel more comfortable if the person you're talking to reminds you of yourself. Because, let's face it, at the end of the day, we're all pretty egocentric. I think the real battle sometimes is to fight that ego and, realize that we don't have to be in the spotlight all the time. We can stand behind the spotlight and hold it for other people.
Right. Well, and another thought on the synchronicity topic that I'm reminded of is one of the recommendations that I hear a lot for individuals, but also for, teams who are trying to work together is taking improv classes. And I don't know if you've ever looked into improv at all, but one of the guiding mantras of improv is to say yes. And it's a similar sort of thing when you go into a conversation with someone where you're sort of trying to pick up on what they're throwing you and you're trying to say yes to it in a manner of speaking, that you're trying to find the vibe that they are putting out and then you're trying to latch on to that. And in improv, it's such an, have you ever taken improv classes or done anything like that? Or
I have not, but my second podcast guest and I did an exercise where we play the yes and game where we crafted a story in the segue in between one person kind of passing the conversational baton to the other person is saying yes, and we did XYZ.
Right, exactly. And so that's that's perfect. That's the mantra of improv, is to always say yes, so that if I'm on stage with you and I say I'm a fireman, you don't say you're not a fireman, because then the improv just sort of dies. Mm-hmm. But if you can say, Kyle, you are definitely a fireman. I see your fireman outfit. I, see your hat and blah, blah, blah. What happens if you sort of take the yes and you're taking what they're saying and then you're continuing the energy of that. And I think there's so much of a parallel with that and trying to synchronize yourself with another person in conversation.
Oh man. Okay. So as you're talking, I'm trying to fight my natural impulse to say, yes, and you are a fireman, but what are we doing at this water park? Nothing's on fire. And
right.
And it just goes on from there. I love that. So something that I've written a lot about, written some stuff about, and I'm going to continue writing about, is the concept of stop words versus go words. So there's a really, really famous high performance coach. His name is Marshall Goldsmith, and he actually fines his clients $20 every time they start a sentence with no, but, or some sort of stop word, because that's really stopping the conversation. That's stopping, just think about it. If you're especially if you're a leader and you're leading a team and you're finding yourself starting conversations with but or no, it's just a really subtle thing, but how is that going to impact your team's morale? Because, they're like, man, Jeff, he's always thinking about how things might go wrong, even though that may not be your inward intention at all. Maybe you're just trying to protect your team. Imagine if you started it, even if you disagreed with something and you could say, yeah, you know what? I think that really does have some merit. And I think it does if we did it XYZ way. What do you think?
Right.
That changes it completely. The dynamics are completely different. And that's just by altering one word. So that's a really fascinating thing.
Yeah, I actually did that a lot when I worked in advertising, and I was giving feedback to people who worked for me, because it's something that I had read years before, that it really is that word but. So if you're giving feedback, and the typical approach is the sort of shit sandwich. Sorry, you can bleep that out.
No, you can cuss. This is fine.
Where you're like, oh, really good job on the report, but you totally messed it up, And what I had read and what served me really well when giving feedback is that you do try to avoid that word but, that because what happens is it essentially negates everything that you said before it. So even though you led with what you think is a beautifully tasty shit sandwich, where you said, oh, this great report, you're really laying it on thick, and you're like, but you sort of left out some key points. And so they don't hear the good part at all. They just hear the criticism. And what I was coached to do and found really helpful is to just change up your vocabulary just a little bit and just say, the thing is, or the only thing is, which is even better, so that it minimizes. So, Bill, great report. You did an awesome job. The only thing is I would change blah, blah, blah. It's a subtle language shift, like you said, but it's such a powerful, subtle shift because it no longer negates the positive message that you're trying to give. If anything, it sort of minimizes the negative and lets that positive feedback really stand on its own.
What's really important with that is humans are we're programmed to seek out the negative. Like a good example is a creator. Okay, well, I'll tell an actual story. How about that? So I have a YouTube channel that I enjoy making videos for. I'm actually in a position now where I can start making more videos for it, which I'm really excited about. And I've got one video from a few years ago. I think the content is great in the video. What I will say, I've learned a lot since then. So my videos have gotten way better, like anything.
Hopefully, well, that's the direction. Yeah, I was going to say that's the direction that you want to go.
Yeah. But of course, this is the video that's getting all the views. And so people are like, yes, I love it, but he talks way too slow. Like, it's just really funny how our minds latch onto that. It's 'cause it's easy to do. But when we shift that language, it shifts it from a place of like, instead of the negative thing becoming the sticky thing, the sticky thing is, oh yeah, Kyle really liked that report.
Right.
And he gave me some great feedback for next time. So,
and he's a fireman.
And he's a fireman at a water park. So yeah, super important. And on that same vein, so I'm really interested in kind of the language that we use when we talk to ourselves as well. And I know your last podcast guest at this point was Gary John Bishop. And I listened to some of that, and I thought it was really fascinating when he talks about how we just have this sort of internal monologue that's going on. And it was the difference between, I think it was narrative monologue versus
assertive.
Assertive, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, like, what did you learn from that conversation, and what have you struggled with that in the past? Because I know, outside of the scope of people skills, even with business, like having your own company, guess what? You have to like really stay on top of that internal monologue.
Wait, you do? Oh, crap. Yeah, no. Yeah, that was a great interview. Gary John Bishop had just a ton of wisdom to share. And that was also one of those situations where, a lot of times you'll read these books for guests that you're having on, as you know, and oftentimes you don't necessarily expect to be blown away as much as you are. And I was really kicked I think I mentioned this in the interview to Gary, but I was actually sort of kicked in the gut by a few chapters in that book. This book, of course, is Unfuck Yourself. Can't remember the subtitle. I think it's Get Out of Your Head and Into Your Life. Mm-hmm. Sorry, you'll have to bleep me yet again.
No, I curse a lot, so I feel like if people are offended by that, they can just leave.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I saw that most of your episodes are explicit, so we're just going to curse up a storm now. Anyway, no, I did want to make sure and mention that book because it's a great book. But yeah, so you're right. So one of the things he talks about is this difference between assertive and narrative a communication or internal dialogue, because like you said, we talk to ourselves all the time. And this is something that I'm really starting to notice a lot more lately, because I've started meditating a little bit more. I got the Headspace app, which you're probably familiar with. Mm-hmm. Really great investment. It's not like serious meditation. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm like good at meditation now because I have this app, but it's a good intro to meditation, I think, especially for busy people. So I've noticed as I've started to meditate that, I mean, your mind is constantly chattering. I mean, when I'm meditating, I can't go more than like 1.5 seconds without a new thought popping in my head. But throughout your day, it's even more intense. Like when you're going through your day, Gary John Bishop talks about how there's this constant narrative where, and I think his example that he used in our interview was, let's say you go get a coffee at Starbucks, you're standing in line, your mind, without you consciously thinking about it, is saying, oh, I really want a coffee. Maybe I should get a double espresso. Oh, who's that lady in front of me? That's an interesting purse she has. Oh, wait, is that a dog coming in? It's constantly commenting. And so that's the narrative mind, right? Or the narrative conversation that's going through your head without you even realizing it. That's fine. We have to recognize that that's going to happen. And Gary talks about, and what meditation teaches you, is to sort of like not latch on to that necessarily. Also recognize that it's happening. So just sort of watch those thoughts come through. But what Gary really advocates for is trying to shift towards taking a little more control over that inner voice and trying to have some assertive thoughts as well. And the other interesting thing that he talks about, I'll get into that, what that is, but I think it's important to note, it's different than affirmations. So assertions versus affirmations. And I didn't know this before talking to Gary, but, affirmations we're all familiar with. It's like, I'm a good person. I'm a tiger. I'm, powerful, blah, blah, blah. Very early in his book, Gary makes the point. He's like, I'm not going to tell you that you're a fucking like zebra or a lion or that you're all powerful, because it's BS. The idea of affirmations generally is that you're trying to tell yourself something that isn't true. Maybe it's true. You have the potential for it to be true, but oftentimes the reason that affirmations don't work is because you're trying to push a boulder up a hill, essentially. You don't believe it in your head. And so what he advocates for is a subtle shift, is assertions. And I didn't even really know the distinction before I talked to him and read his book, but what he talks about is having these little assertions, where an assertion is something that a thought that you can presence, as he says it. So the great example is like one of the first chapters in his book. The way the book is arranged, it's a series of, I think, 7 assertions. And the first one, if I remember correctly, is I am willing. And this was a really, really interesting idea, because the idea is that you don't need to affirm that you're willing. You can assert that you're willing, because it's something that you can actually, again, that word presence, he uses it as a verb. It's something that you can bring. You can bring willingness. You can create willingness out of nothing, essentially. You can't make yourself a tiger or make yourself believe that you're a lion or make yourself believe that you're like a Fortune 500 CEO. But you can be willing. And he carries that thread on. And the idea is you can presence willingness, because the idea is that you can be willing to put in the work. You can be willing to go through the steps, because that's something that you can believe. You don't need to say, I am definitely going to be a Fortune 500 CEO, but you can say, I am willing to bust my ass every day. I am willing to meet the right people, to take the right courses, to put in the sweat to actually make it happen. So that subtle distinction between affirmation and assertion, I thought, was a really powerful thing.
It's so important, because it's one of those things where you're right. This negative, just chatter is going to happen. Some of it's negative, some of it's positive. It's always happening. And I love that you mentioned meditation. I'm actually using an app called Oak. That's really, really good. Like Headspace, but free. They're all good. If you haven't meditated out there listening, do it for me. If I'm getting back into it, I have to do it for 7 to 10 days before I notice anything. But at that point, I really do notice that that chatter, it still happens, but it doesn't, I don't necessarily believe it. It doesn't kind of well up and consume all of my thoughts, because I'm able to let it pass, almost like clouds in the sky.
Right.
And it's really good, I think, with people skills in particular, for people who, I've been doing this a while, it's really important to be okay with emotions that rise up and not let them consume you to a point where it puts you in either a negative state or an internal state or a negative internal state.
Right.
You can just deal with them and just say okay, you know what? I'm feeling this right now. It's going to pass. And then once it passes, you've unlocked, it's like a cheat code. You've unlocked the ability to refocus yourself for the situation. And in reality, in real time, this may only take 5 or 10 seconds. But for someone who's not skilled in that area, who allows those emotions to consume all of their thoughts and bring them to an internal place, that may torpedo their entire evening, certainly, or maybe even their entire weekend.
Right.
So I cannot recommend, meditation enough. And you don't have to take off your shoes and sit in the grass. You don't have to do that stuff. I do it in my office. I just carve out a little bit of time, and it makes such a profound difference on everything. Not just people skills, but it makes a difference, I think, in business. It makes a difference in just feeling reactionary versus proactive.
Right. Proactive. Yeah.
It makes such a difference.
Yeah. Well, yeah. One of the things that I've learned with meditation recently specifically is this idea of noting. And it's this technique of essentially recognizing when you're having a thought. And just, again, it's like you're supposed to watch it, like you said, like clouds passing by. When you're noting, one of the other things that you realize is that when you have these thoughts that normally would go out of control and sort of you'd continue to spiral, you realize that, and they become an emotion, right? So it's like you have a negative thought, it becomes an emotion, and it becomes this sort of snowball that takes over your your mind for an afternoon or a day or whatever, you realize that these thoughts are actually sort of like the wind for the sail of that emotion, if that makes sense, or it's the fuel to continue that negative spiral. And if you can recognize, oh, that's just a thought, I'm going to watch that, but I'm not going to like get carried away with that. It's such a powerful thing because you realize, yeah, this emotion isn't happening to me right now. It's just a thought that I'm having. And if I can just let that pass, then I'm not going to go down that negative rabbit hole. I think the other side of it, though, is that in some ways you can also look directly into some of those negative thoughts that you're having and say, is this something that I should look at? So rather than just trying to like push away negative thoughts or let them pass by, you can regard them and objectively assess them and say, I'm feeling insecure. Why is that? And oftentimes that may lead you to some specific things that you actually can take action on. So it's not that I'm a loser. I'm not feeling insecure because I'm a loser and no one's ever going to love me. I'm feeling insecure because I've recognized that, you know what? I have not been that good about taking care of myself lately. I have not been that good about dressing my best. I haven't brought my A game. And so I think there's value in not getting carried away in those negative thoughts and fueling that negative emotion. But on some level, there's also some value in objectively regarding those thoughts and saying, is there something here that I could actually take action on to make my life better?
Yeah, I really like that. There's something that I teach called flush, fix, and forget. I didn't invent this. I've been trying to track down the source.
This is a plumbing term.
Yeah, your mind is a toilet. No, I'm just kidding. Sometimes it can be, though. And when you get yourself, and this works really well, like, say you're out and you just told a joke that didn't land and like no one got it and they took it really literally or whatever worst case scenario is. We all know that those are the worst. When you flush that emotion from you, you're trying to step back kind of objectively, and really meditation it is a really good toolkit for this. And you're focusing on what you can actually fix. So something specific. Right. That you actually have control over, because there's a lot that you can't control in the situation. Like maybe they couldn't hear you. Like, well, you can't tell the DJ to turn down the music. But what you can say is like, maybe I should have smiled at the end so people kind of get tipped off that it's a joke. Maybe my delivery needs to be different, whatever it happens to be. And then once you've done those two things, you've earned the right and the obligation to forget it, so that you can move on and close the book. So you've already got a plan for next time, but it shouldn't derail you.
So what was the phrase again? So flush, fix, forget. Flush, fix, forget. So get it out of your head, evaluate it, and then forget it.
Mm-hmm. And like a book that I recently read that's an amazing book is Boyd, the fighter pilot that changed the art of war. And John Boyd's a fighter pilot. He's famous for the observe, orient, decide, act loop.
Yes.
And as you get really good at that OODA loop, you can literally go from the first O, which is observe, to act almost instantaneously, because you're orienting yourself to whatever objective you are. You've already made a quick decision because you know what the next action is going to be. And I find it's the same with flush, fix, and forget. So you can go from flush to forget almost instantaneously, because you're just looking for the one piece of the puzzle that you actually have direct control over.
Right. Is there something useful that I can actually make my life better with?
Yeah. And I think that helps for any new skill. It's just a little more challenging with people skills, because no two situations are quite alike. With guitar, it's a little easier because you're like, well, you know what? I didn't hold the bar chord with my my finger. And so that's a little easier. I need to maybe do some hand exercises to strengthen, because that was always what I struggled with, was when like I started getting into bar chords. I was like, oh man, this hurts.
Or I didn't do my flying air kick and windmill strum.
I don't know what that is, but that sounds awesome.
Just picture like Pete Townsend from The Who.
Oh, nice. Get the Baba O'Reilly thing going.
Yeah.
I like it. So I'm going to hit you with a couple rapid fire questions, something that I'm curious about. So
God, I hope I don't fail.
You might not. I don't know if this isn't pass fail. It's more like, how awesome is Kyle? So
all right.
You mentioned cocktails before. What is, like, if I was coming over to your house for drinks, what's the cocktail that you would make me currently?
It would definitely be an old fashioned. Old fashioned is literally like the first cocktail that was ever created. It's like, if you look back to the first definition of what a cocktail was, the first written definition, it's pretty much an old fashioned. So definitely my go-to.
Yeah, and I actually like old fashioned, so that was a correct answer.
Nice.
You passed. What if I handed you a magic phone and you could send a text message to everyone with a phone? What advice or what insight would you give them in that text message?
I think there are two quotes that come to mind, and neither of them are my own words. But the first one is probably, so if I can get two for the price of one, I'm going to do that. So the first one is a great quote from Mark Twain, and I don't know if the wording is exactly right, but it's something like, in 20 years, you will regret the things that you don't do more than the things that you do. And for me, I think that's such a powerful thing, because so many of us are just sort of like standing on the sidelines thinking about things that could be. I mean, we talked about, the just-in-time, just-in-case information where you're going 40 different ways and you never actually take a stand and take action. I feel like it's so important for people to get out there, take action, and take risks, because ultimately, even if you fail, you are so much more powerful and you grow so much more as a person when you take these risks. And I'm not talking about, like physical risks, like, jumping off a building or something like that, or
base jumping.
No base jumping. I mean, you'd have to talk to my lawyers before I can advocate that. But I'm talking about social risk, and it's all of what we've been talking about. It's like all these times when we're worried about quote unquote failing. Ultimately, we're going to fail if we don't take action. Of course, there's that other quote from Wayne Gretzky, like, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. But my other text that I would send is one of my favorite quotes, again, from another person I mentioned earlier, Dale Carnegie. And it goes, "To the wise man, every day is a new life." I think this is so important because there's, again, so many of us are like sitting on the sidelines. We're not taking action. But the other thing that paralyzes us is some of us think that it's too late in some cases. We think that it's too late to maybe improve our social life, or we think that it's too late to improve our romantic life, or too late to take a risk in our career, or too late to start a business. And I think it's never too late. As long as you have air in your lungs, you can still take these chances. And I think ultimately that's when you're going to feel most alive.
Man, I love those two quotes. It makes me think of the Teddy Roosevelt quote, "The man in the arena."
Yeah.
I actually read The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, which is an incredible book. Highly recommended if you're into biographies or anything like that.
Yes, I am. I'm going to check it out.
It's really good. They're making a Leonardo DiCaprio starring Teddy Roosevelt movie, and I really hope that they're going to cover what's in this book, because it's all pre-presidency, where he's like jumping off horses and tackling cougars right. And like some crazy shit. Like he gave zero fucks.
Yes.
Like he put them in a basket and then lit the basket on fire.
Zero fucks given. Yes.
Zero fucks given. What that makes me think of with that quote is, I think of the part in the quote, you can look it up and I'll link to it in the show notes, but he talks about the timid souls in the stands that know neither victory nor defeat.
Yes.
And I think, speaking for myself, and I hope people listening, like that thing that you've been wanting to do, maybe it's asking your boss for a raise, which, spoiler alert, Kyle has a great video on as well. I teed that one up for you. You didn't even know that one was coming.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
It is. Like, it's been ranked one of the best videos that mankind has they wanted to put it on Voyager, but Kyle wasn't born yet, so they didn't. But that thing that you've been wanting to do, that risk that you want to take, you're as young as you're ever going to be now in this moment. So why wouldn't you? And I think it all goes back to the willingness to take action.
Right.
Because so many of us are just kind of stringing together days in a chain. Like, there's another weekend, there's another weekend, there's another weekend.
Right.
And on a personal note, it's been about 4 or 5 months since my father passed away.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I appreciate that. It was unexpected. It was like one day he was here, one day he was gone. And it really kind of put things in perspective for me, because I realized, like, death was a useful tool in the past for me. Of course I lost a grandma back in like the year 2000, but that's a long time ago. But to lose someone very close to you, you just realize that, like, look, memento mori, like you don't have an infinite number of days, so you might as well make each day count. And it sounds like cheesy motivational bullshit, which I really don't care for. But when the day closes and you're closing your eyes to go to bed, like what I do is, there's a Stoic principle that's like, balance life's books daily. So I kind of recap my day, and then I sort of recap my life as well, because I know there's always a chance that I might not wake up. And it sounds really like heavy and really serious, but it's just a way to put things in perspective, so that I want to feel like I'm proud of the life that I've led up to this point. And then every day that I get to live another day, that's a very exciting thing for me, because that, I feel like it primes me and preps me to take actions that I normally wouldn't take.
That's awesome. It's funny, I hadn't heard that expression, balance life's books daily. I like that a lot. And what you're mentioning, it reminds me of another thought that I've had, that I don't know that if this is actually as profound to other people, but for me, I find it moving, is this idea that we all sort of have this miniature time machine. And I'll explain what I mean, is that, think about, you look back at last year and you're thinking, I really wish that I would have done X last year. And you think, if only I would have done, X, Y, and Z, these 2 or 3 things, I would feel a lot better about myself this year if I had accomplished that. It's like, guess what? It's only a year later. So in essence, it's like a time machine. It's like you can go back and do that. And I feel like looking at life in that way gives you that immediacy to recognize those things of, I regret not doing this last year, so therefore I better get on that shit. I'm going to identify those 1 or 2 things that I regret not doing last year. I'm going to do them this year. And it's not a big deal that it's 365 days later. It's essentially a little mini time machine. And for me, I find that thought powerful, because it's so true. It's like, you're a year older, big deal. You can still go out and do that, and you can still make last year as good as you want it to, even though it's a year later. I
really like that. And actually, at the end of each year, what I do, I picked up this habit from Tim Ferriss. I look at my calendar, because I live and die by my calendar. I look at the last 365 days, and I look at things that I'm really excited about, that I liked, and I look at the times that I wasn't happy. I try to minimize, for the coming year, I want to minimize the things that caused a lot of stress in my life, and I want to maximize the things that I actually like doing. That's kind of that's one side of it. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm trying to journal more. So being able to dive into like, oh, I really like that. I wonder what I wrote about for that day. That way I get kind of like almost like a soulful, like, this is why I liked it. Or these are the moments that I really, really enjoyed. And trying to capture those, because it's easy to just kind of gloss over and always be surprised at like, oh, it's 2018, it's 2019, it's 2020. And that may seem like the future to you, but the reality is it's just the present, and you need to actually not put off the things that you're going to be excited about looking back.
That's right.
So I have really enjoyed this conversation. Just curious, like, where can people find more about you? Where can I send my listeners to learn more about you, Kyle?
Yes, you can. I think the best place is just to go to my website, and that's thedistilledman.com. So don't forget the. People are interested, I do have a free download. It's an ebook that I wrote a few years ago called The 48-Hour Gentleman. And it's really all about providing guys with a series of 9 things that they can do over the course of one weekend, baby steps to start becoming a better man. Because like we talked about in the beginning, I feel like as much as you sort of learn and, get these sort of cerebral tactics or cerebral thoughts and lessons, it's always good to have actionable steps that you can take.
Awesome. You definitely need to check that out. That's going to be in the show notes. So definitely don't miss out on that. Kyle, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm definitely going to have you on for round 2 at some point.
Definitely. Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. I had a lot of fun.